Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, April 7th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Mike Konczal, Director of Progressive Thought at the Roosevelt Institute, on what should be in Phase 4 and whether we can get it. Then we will talk to John Nichols, The Nation magazine from Wisconsin, the epicenter of an election travesty. Meanwhile, Phase 3 of the stimulus is in shambles right now for anyone who is not a massive corporation. Knives out in the White House as someone leaks a Navarro January memo warning of a pandemic, but nobody knew. And surprise, surprise, Donald Trump has a vested interest in the hydroxychloroquine companies. And Republican Senator David Perdue is the latest to be revealed as profiting off of the secret coronavirus intel briefing. Tyson closes a pork processing factory and grocery workers are infected. How will we provide goods and services going forward? Boris Johnson is in the ICU. Foreign minister has been deputized. And early data show that African Americans are contracting and dying of coronavirus at an incredibly elevated rate. Lastly, SCOTUS expands police stopping powers if you're driving. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We had some issues the other day in regarding our streaming. We hopefully are in better shape today. Bear with us. We're going to do the plugs and notices at the end of the program because I don't know if it's superstition or we actually think that we get a certain amount of time streaming and then it cuts out for whatever reason. The cable company that Matt uses is not great. We're not going to knock them because, yeah, we are. Optimum because
James Dolan.
There may be a lot of people using them. I don't know, in the city, or we're not we're not sure. Nevertheless, this is what we're going to do, and we endeavor to get the show to you live every day. We hope that you will give us some patience and continue to watch. And we will continue to do the show. And of course, we post it and all the clips will come up later. I don't know if we're going out on audio today or not, but we're going to work on trying to restore that as well. Right now, I think we're just doing YouTube because we're streaming issues. So that said, also reminder, it's your support that keeps this program alive, particularly in this era. Our monetization rate, as they say on YouTube, is down dramatically, not to be unexpected. Advertisers are pulling back. We still fortunately have advertisers who are coming through our podcast. And, we're we're taking those as those come in. They're a little bit slower than normal as well, but this is the way it goes. But if you are in a position, you listen to the show on a regular basis and you can support the program, please do. You can do so by going to jointhemajorityreport.com, become a member. You get extra content, and you keep the show trucking along. And you also help other people get this content. If you are one of those people who have lost your job, if you're dealing with some type of financial stress, don't hesitate. Send us an email, majorityreporters@gmail.com. It'll give us a little time because we're backed up on a lot of stuff, but we will hook you up. No one will be locked out for financial reasons on this show. Attitude will get you locked out, but financial reasons, no. Let's go into this. I've been talking about, I guess we started this conversation with Hayes on Friday when he was on, and it was based upon a White House presser where the admiral who has been appointed in charge of the supply chain, sourcing and distributing personal protection equipment, other needed supplies to deal with the health crisis, basically revealed that what the federal government was doing was expending tax dollars, sourcing material in places like China and around the world, flying it back to America, and then instead of distributing it to hospitals or states for them to distribute to hospitals or municipalities for them to distribute it to hospitals, they essentially either gave it or sold it at cost to a half a dozen medical supply distribution companies that, yes, have maybe the apparatus to get it to the hospitals, although you could have just brought these to the states who have been working on this. In New York State, as you know, all the hospitals now have been basically put under one administrative umbrella. The state is now coordinating supply lines, where staff goes. It's as if it's one big state-run hospital system in New York now, because that's the most efficient way to do it. And I suppose you could make an argument that these medical distributors, they already have these relationships and they know how to get it out the door, but they weren't selling it at a fair market value. They weren't capped on what they could charge for this. They basically started an auction process, which not only meant that you had states that didn't have the resources were getting outbid, but sometimes all the states were getting outbid and it was going back overseas. This is the type of stuff, honestly, that when this is over, and I don't even mean entirely over, but when the narrow crisis that we're facing right now, this surge is over, this is the type of stuff that I want to see people in court. I want to see hearings, and then I want to see people in court, criminal court. Here is J.B. Pritzker. He's the governor of Illinois, confirming all of this from the buyer perspective of a state. Clip number 3.
Because what the White House has done is created, they call this the air bridge, where they're bringing stuff back from China to the United States, and then they're delivering it to private companies in the United States, not to the states. And they're letting all of us bid against each other for those goods that are owned by the private companies. So we've just gone around all that and gone directly to manufacturers wherever we could.
This is appalling. This is appalling. When we talk to Mike Konczal, he'll have more to say about sort of like how our system of our government and basically where we're starting, does not allow for providing relief in dealing with the oncoming economic catastrophe we could be looking at. But this is an ideological problem. This is an ideological problem. There was absolutely no need for this. In fact, We played a clip of the General Honore, the guy who was in charge of this during Katrina, and he said he's never heard of anything like this. We've never done it this way. It's absurd. And it really is criminal because just that process itself delayed everything. There's no reason. My understanding, too, is that when the Patriots sent their plane over to China to buy a bunch of N95 masks, to bring it back from Massachusetts, it was confiscated by the federal government and then presumably given to a private enterprise to then auction it off. This is just nuts. It's nuts. It's enraging. And we need to see more, frankly, from the opposition party in dealing with this. It's completely nuts. We will talk more about this as the program goes on. Hopefully I won't lose it. Should remind you that the Majority Report is made in part by Skillshare. The first 500 people who go to skl.sh/Majority Report 7 are going to get a free premium membership to Skillshare for 2 entire months. Skillshare, as you know, is an online learning community that offers thousands of classes on almost any topic you imagine. And all classes are taught by experts in their field. They have classes on drawing, painting, photography, video editing, web design, running a small business, a whole lot more. I don't know why I have trouble saying drawing. I think that's a Massachusetts thing. Anyways, almost all the classes are less than an hour long. Every class is split up into bite-sized lessons, like little chapters. So it's easy to fit Skillshare into your week, easy to watch a couple of chapters now, go tell the kids to be quiet or feed them lunch or something like that, and then get back to it. I've got 3 now that I have lined up to watch. I've already started watching one. I got a couple chapters into Haircuts at Home. As you can see, my hair is about as long as it's been in, I don't know, probably 2 decades. And it's getting really long. I mean, you can't even tell in the back. I mean, it's out of control. So I'm watching How to Give Haircuts at Home. Also, bread making, sourdough for beginners. I've got Mila on that. She's better do it quick because we got Passover coming up in 36 hours. Bread's got to be out of the house. And then I'm going to do speed reading. I'm a fast reader, but why not brush up? Skillshare has classes for every level. Whether you wanted to get better at something you already have a lot of experience with, or you want to explore something that's totally new to you. Everybody can benefit from setting aside a little more time to get creative or to improve their skills in specific, entrepreneurship, et cetera, et cetera. A membership to Skillshare costs less than $10 a month. It gives you access to their entire library of classes. But for the first 500 people who go to skl.sh/Majority Report 7, you're going to get a free membership for 2 whole months. Put the link underneath this video. If you're watching on YouTube, it is in the podcast description. Also, I always enjoy reading ads for The New Yorker. Why? Because The New Yorker publishes the best writing by the most influential authors in the world. It's got award-winning reporting, political commentary, cultural criticism, fiction and poetry, cartoons, and more. I've got to say, the only thing that I read now in print form, I read it digitally, The New Yorker, but I'll do that because I'll go and I'll read, I'm just reading actually a digital piece on why the testing regime fell apart in this country. But when I want to just relax for 10 minutes or half an hour, because that's all I get, I don't get more than like 27 minutes of relaxation on any given day. I'll pick up my print copy of The New Yorker. Sometimes I'll do the crossword puzzles. I'll try and avoid the politics, but inevitably I get sucked in. but I'll read reviews about food or movies, because I don't know anything about any of that stuff. And obviously, I always enjoy the cartoons. The New Yorker's exceptional writers, as you know, make them unique. They got Robin Wright, National Magazine Award winner. She covers politics and international affairs, and Hilton Als, who won the Pulitzer Prize for criticism in 2017. Now you can get 12 weeks for just $6. That's half the regular cost. Plus the New Yorker tote bag. You'll get home delivery of the print edition each week, along with unlimited access to NewYorker.com, which includes 10 to 15 exclusive site-only stories every day. Every day. This deal also includes app access, online archives dating back to 1925. I'd like to actually do that. Sort of just browse that stuff. Crossword puzzles and more. Get 12 weeks of the New Yorker for just $6 plus an exclusive tote at NewYorker.com/majority. You will save 50% when you enter the code majority at checkout. NewYorker.com/majority. Enter the code majority at checkout. Huge savings on a great periodical. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Mike Konczal. He's the director of progressive thought at the Roosevelt Institute. Right back after this. We are back. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report. On the phone, Mike Konczal. He's the director of progressive thought at the Roosevelt Institute. I've been reading a lot of your pieces, Mike, and welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back on.
In March, you at the Roosevelt Institute came out with a report, a forward-thinking policy response to the coronavirus recession, and you were writing in another piece that you wrote, I guess now 2 weeks ago, that the pace in which the problem that we are facing economically was moving so quickly that your imagination on some level had trouble keeping up with it. And just give me a sense of like where we are now in the way that you view what's going to happen. I mean, on some level, I feel like I remember once playing Frisbee, and I was running as a kid, and I was running backwards and banged into a tree, and I was in such a state of shock that I froze there before I crumpled on the ground. And I feel like we're in that moment where we like banged into the tree and we're just sort of stunned and we're about to crumple. Is that I mean, is that your sense in terms of the economics of this?
Yeah, I think in the same way, everyone, on March 10th, maybe didn't quite understand how life-changing the COVID crisis would be. The same exact thing was true of economists who are not epidemiologists and who do not have a good sense of how severe this would get. So I wrote about in March 10th, there was maybe talk of about a $500 billion stimulus. $1 trillion stimulus seemed very exaggerated. A week later, March 17th, maybe talking about a $1 trillion stimulus was the normal. And then a week and a half ago, we passed a $2 trillion, a little over a $2 trillion stimulus. And it's very likely there'll be another expansion done very quickly. So the scope of what's changing is expanded quite rapidly, as well as the worry that we are facing a planned depression happening right now, and a lot of uncertainty about how quickly and if we'll recover.
What are the sort of when you sit down to contemplate the stimulus package, let's say phase 3, for instance, what are the principles that you're operating on? Like, what is the I guess, I understand that we're in triage, right? As opposed to sort of like long-term, but what are the operative principles for triage in this situation?
Right. So I think the metaphor a lot of people use, and I think it's useful, is freezing the economy, which is we understand that large parts of the economy, but not all parts, need to stop for the next, as of a month ago, the next 2 to 3 months, and we're not quite sure when it'll be over. But we needed to freeze the economy, which meant keeping people whole, making sure people could pay their rent, or making sure that they weren't overwhelmed by current bills, as well as keeping our economic relationships in place. So businesses that might collapse, as most small businesses only have about a week or two of liquid funds, businesses that might collapse if they have no customers for 2 months, finding ways to get them the resources they need to ensure that they'll still be there on the other side. Because I think the big worry, the thing that would turn this into a very weird kind of temporary recession versus a full-blown depression, is that if all these businesses and all these economic relationships and all these employment contracts suddenly just disappear into nothingness, you can't just reconstruct that on the fly. So that's why there's been a huge set of understanding about why we need to interject forcibly into getting everyday people money, getting unemployed people unemployment insurance so that they can go on furlough, and getting small and medium-sized businesses a financial backstop so that they can keep their businesses alive during this recovery, or during this quarantine.
It seems to me, and I want to get your assessment on this, that the challenge to the United States in this regard is far greater than almost maybe any industrialized nation, because we don't have an apparatus to provide support to people. I mean, I think that's basically, I mean, you're writing about that, I guess, in this piece about our system is hostile to real reform, but even we don't have the automatic stabilizers. We don't have we don't have the cups. Never mind, the question as to whether we should fill them up. We don't have the cups, essentially, that are already built like they are in most countries.
Absolutely. And you compound that with the fact that we are a very large country, and we are also a federalist country, which is that a lot of economic decision-making takes place at the city or state level. It's been a real disaster. So if you look at countries that were successful in freezing their economies, you have a place like Denmark, which has very strong labor unions. And in a very real sense, labor capital and the government, the state, can sit down and negotiate how they're going to freeze the economy, how much payrolls might go down, how much pay cuts might happen, how much the federal government will pay, and so on, and how much the corporations will pay. There's no mechanism here, particularly in the private sector. Labor has been decimated since 1980. So it's not like you can sit down with labor unions and dictate how we're going to make sure that everyone doesn't have to work for 3 months and then how we pick it back up. On purpose, and not just in red states, unemployment insurance has not been expanded. If anything, it's contracted quite a bit in the last decade or two. And so putting millions more people in a short notice, like within weeks, on unemployment, there's just not the infrastructure to do it. And in addition, so many of our jobs have become precariously non-employment contracts. So they're like, contractors, or you work for a app where you're a contractor of the app, though in a real way you're an employee of the app. You don't get unemployment insurance. So getting people unemployment insurance, even though we allocated hundreds of billions of dollars to quickly get it out the door, there's a real choke point in how atrophied our public systems have become under the last several decades. The same thing with small businesses. We essentially are paying banks to give money to businesses. We can give money to businesses, these small, medium-sized businesses. It's not like rocket science, but the only interface we have to do it rapidly is through the private banking system, and we essentially have to give them a lot of money to do it. So it's a really messed up system for doing quick change that's effective and helping people. And, in the same way, a lot of people are in a struggle to get the unemployment, and they should apply. And I'm not trying to discourage anyone at all from doing it. It's going to be much more of a struggle than if we were a country that took these things seriously.
All right, and I just want to go into a little bit more detail in those two categories, and then we'll talk about the third sort of tranche, if you will, of I guess there's more than three, but in terms of the private sector, in terms of the unemployment. I know that, I've been reading some pieces out of Florida that Rick Scott basically jerry-rigged the system as a way of driving down unemployment numbers, right? Just numbers, not actually unemployed people, but numbers. And that has left the whole system in shambles. Just give us a sense of what that actually means in practice.
It means that in normal recessions, where the unemployment that we are having would normally take 6 months to essentially come online or become fully unemployed. So the Great Recession, which was pretty traumatic, and everyone listening probably remembers, or at least understood that, unemployment went to 10%, but that took actually about 6 months. Here we had 10% unemployment in probably about 2 weeks. We'll know more with time, but probably within about 2 weeks. So these systems, which are designed not to discourage people from using them. You're going to read a lot about how there's funny programming languages, or things are really dusty or haven't been updated in years. But the real thing is not really technological. It's political. People do not want these systems to work because they don't want to pay people. They don't want to expand the usage of it. They'd rather put the money to other things, especially in red states, things like corporate tax cuts or large-scale prisons. And as such, it's just hard for people to get them. They're going to have to work a lot harder, which means people might get discouraged from doing it, which means they won't have the money to stay on unemployment insurance, which means that there'll be less spending in the economy, and it'll have a real knock-on effect that harms us later.
So, it basically just comes down to, a more sophisticated version of you got to fill this out in triplicate. And then you got to file one with, in this office, and then one in that office. And then you've got to get stamps on those and then return them, and then send a self-addressed envelope. But the flag, the stamp needs to be, a bicentennial stamp. And you can find those on, it's that type of thing, right? It's just like putting up all these roadblocks to making it harder to actually execute, and hoping that people just give up in frustration.
Yeah, and so there's obviously the roadblocks that were put in place. Same way there's voting restrictions that have been implemented over the last decade or two that we're now going to see hit the COVID crisis. It's the same thing with basic economic security. We've made it so it's legally easier for employers to deny workers their employment rights, like unemployment insurance. And the states themselves have discouraged these programs from staying updated or even actively dismantling them. And now we have a real crisis where people need them, and it's going to really harm people. And even when there's not necessarily, even other things, one thing we haven't mentioned is sending checks to everyday people. Every adult, every adult more or less gets a $1,200 check. Every child a $600 check. There's really harsh restrictions if you're not a citizen. And if you make over $100,000, it starts to get clawed back. But make sure to be aware of that. But the problem is there's not an actual list of everyone's name and address and checking account. So you can't actually just send people checks quickly. The most approximate thing we used to have for this, which was aid to families with dependent children, was eliminated during welfare reform by Bill Clinton and Republicans in the 1990s. So the obvious mechanism we have for just getting poorer families with children checks doesn't exist anymore. So now everyone's running around trying to figure out how to do this through the tax code. There's a lot of people who don't file, who won't be aware of this. These checks might take months to get to some people when we really need them there this week to make rent that was due on the 1st.
Physically, they
so
can't.
These systems
they can't
have just been weakened in such a way that makes it really hard to do these policies.
Physically, they can't even print more than 20 million a week, and on the back of, an envelope, I'm not great at math, but that sounds to me like less than 10% of the people in the country who are due a check, essentially. And if they can only do 10% per week, I mean, people can figure it out. It takes 10 weeks to get everybody a check. All right. So let's also talk about this, the SBA, the loans. I mean, those loans seem like a good idea. The problem, like you say, is there's no apparatus to deliver this. And as far as I can tell, all the banks who are supposed to administer this, they weren't ready to do that. They didn't know how to do it. And we're basically paying them to service it, which I guess, I mean, there's no other apparatus to do this. But let's move to the third tranche, which is that $400-500 billion that goes to corporate America that essentially is being leveraged by the Fed to make the bailout for corporations closer to $4 trillion. And that, I mean, it seems to have like no problem. We've already built those pipes that we can get that money to them immediately. And it sort of feels like, and this seems to be the criticism of the stimulus, to the extent that I can figure it out, is that, like you say, we're under a freeze. And how do we freeze the economy? And I guess I was using the metaphor of like, we're all under a yellow flag, except for those people who are in entities that are going to get the money through the Fed and through that corporate bailout. They're allowed to go at full speed around the racetrack. Whereas the rest of us, we're in a yellow flag situation. And this is going to increase wealth disparity, income disparity, and create more concentrated power by corporations.
Yeah, I think that's all right. There's two elements to it. One is a $50 billion straight up bailout fund, which is airlines, Boeing, national security companies, which in our corporate warfare state could be literally any corporation. But there's $50 billion, which is going to have people trying to observe it. And many of them are quite talented, and I wish them luck. But that is money that is basically off to corporate America in the strictest way of avoiding a bankruptcy court. Then there's $450 billion, which will be levered up by the Federal Reserve, which will do a couple different things. Most notably, it will make loans to large corporations as the credit markets freeze up. The Fed is really the only entity competently tasked administratively, especially at the federal level, to do this kind of work of quickly reacting to macroeconomic crises. But it is not set up to, say, send people checks. You could easily imagine that. Everyone could have a checking account at the Federal Reserve, or a little credit card that's their account at the Federal Reserve that's maybe run through postal banks, and the Fed could press a button and give everyone $1,200 within seconds. That is not what we have. As you said, it's going to take 10 weeks to hopefully send everyone a check if they can find them. So the disparity of these two different kinds of reactions is really stark and really shoddy, and speaks to how quickly we can help large corporations and how limited and weak our response is to to everyday people and smaller businesses.
Okay, so and then we're seeing I guess let's do it this way: grade that stimulus based upon concept. And then, execution, I think we can give another grade. But in terms of like conceiving of it, where would you put that stimulus? How would you grade that, the phase 3?
C minus, C. Here's the problem, is that, and there's maybe a glass half full way of understanding, is that instead of finding the solution and adequately levering to it, it's a bunch of small stopgap measures that may hopefully add up to do something. So instead of giving everyone an actual basic income, you get one check. It doesn't renew, even though that's insane, because if there's a Democratic president next year and a Republican Senate, they will absolutely not renew it, even if unemployment is 10 or 15 or 20%. Instead of, and this goes to the small business and medium-sized business loan issue with the banks, instead of actually just sitting down and saying, we are going to backstop payrolls It's going to cost us much money, but we think it's worth it to keep our small and medium-sized business ecosystem intact. Instead, they kind of created this loan program, which might turn into a grant. And then halfway through writing the legislation, they're like, oh, wait, but maybe it's actually going to like help preserve payroll. So it's a little bit more generous. And then they pass it. And now it's clear it's the mechanism by which we're going to try to backstop it. And now they are rapidly scrambling to fix the program after the fact, instead of just straight up coming out in front and saying, we have this kind of crisis that requires this kind of response from our government. There's just no leadership to say those kinds of things and no one willing to make those kinds of bold demands. So instead you get a lot of like third measures, which maybe if they all add up well, can sort of constitute a solution, but it's not a real solution executed well.
And the execution similarly poorly graded. So what what do you think that give me your assessment of how the Democrats played this? Because I mean I think it's quite clear too that phase 4, there's two separate things that are going on here. One is like, what are we going to do for in terms of an economic response? But then there's also sort of like, what are we going to do in terms of, well, there seems to be two other areas for me where there's other things that should be included in this, and that maybe Democrats can leverage this, which is one, how do we deal with goods and services? I don't know if this is going to be a big deal, but Tyson's, one pork processing plant closes. I mean, I'm not a fan of Tyson's or pork processing plants, but I imagine we could also have a problem with produce. Like, people are going to get sick. We're starting to see people get sick at at supermarkets. Maybe there'll be people who will run to come and work at those supermarkets, or maybe they won't. Maybe there'll be people who will come to pick in the fields. Maybe they won't, but we could have like a goods and services issue. And then we also have a civil sort of a citizenry issue, like in terms of voting and other functions, where Democrats could maybe leverage stuff and put stuff like that in. Like, if you want these things, you got to give us these things. But what's your sense of what Democrats should push for in a phase 4, specifically economic, but then maybe you can talk about those other issues if you have some ideas.
Sure. So I'm not a Hill reporter, so I don't know the insides of who made what political decisions and who should get credit or blame. But I will note two things. One is that, like, Mitch McConnell is a tough operator and Trump is a very chaotic figure. The Democrats in the Senate fought for higher unemployment insurance. They fought for a bunch of other things. And, we can judge how much they got or what they got. What stands out to me is the House. Even though it was probably clear they were going to vote on whatever the Senate was able to pass, did not provide a good alternative mechanism that was a clear messaging response. And as such, it leaves us very adrift on what happens next. Speaker Pelosi and all the other Democrats, we don't point to the House bill as having, the public option or the Medicare for all or the Green New Deal or what, like those maybe not appropriate here, but like there's no, that's the thing that the Dems should fight for, and the Dems are fighting for.
Right. They're not offering any type of alternative to which to judge whether this was effective or not. Exactly.
The leadership in the House got into a big fight about whether or not the check should be universal. And then, they quickly scrambled after they passed one thing and kind of had a laundry list bill, which had a lot of priorities in it, but wasn't an actual messaging bill, or not even just messaging in a cheap way, but an actual, here is what the alternative is. So now as we go, and the government runs really slowly and this crisis is evolving very fast, but the phase 3 things are in some ways no-brainers. In a recession, you increase unemployment insurance, you backstop the states, you get money to people, you try to keep employment going. This crisis is so crazy that it's hard to do that fast and at the scale we're talking about. But the next step things that are the things okay, how do we protect essential workers who are facing incredibly precarious working situations with no legal protections or unions? Do we do a unionization bill? Do we do some sort of, some sort of new Social Security? I don't even know, because it hasn't been articulated. I mean, I have ideas, but there's no thing that the Democrats have put forward. Same thing with healthcare. Millions of people are going to lose their healthcare. We just had this huge fight about how like people like their healthcare because they get to keep it from their employer, but now millions of people will not get
sometimes
that.
They get to keep
is
it.
That
Sometimes
Medicare
they
for
don't.
all, is that TRICARE, is that Medicaid? Like the Dems have not messaged this and put forward an alternative. And so in the election, what's going to happen with the election? Like, what is the actual thing Democrats want as a safeguard for the election? Individual senators like Senator Warren and Senator Sanders are putting forward messages, but it's not like the leadership is doing it in such a way that it provides the real alternative.
What would you put in phase 4? What would be your top 2 or 3 priorities?
I'm not a healthcare expert, but something needs to be done about healthcare that can start transitioning us to Medicaid for all, Medicare for all, whatever, however it's going to go. Now we need like the smart thinking about how to start the transition, because I think that it's just the fact that it is a healthcare crisis in addition to a mass unemployment crisis is going to make it doubly worse than, say, the Great Recession. I would like to see a lot more funding to states. We know that austerity in the states, one, really harms the recovery as it did in 2009, 2010. And also the austerity locks itself in. So services and schools that are cut or dismembered don't come back in the recovery. So aid to states, I think, is really important. And I think the big thing is getting the stuff to automatically renew, which is a no-brainer to me. But, this recession is not going away. And if the Dems win the presidency in November, like Mitch McConnell, if they still control the Senate, are not going to negotiate with them if unemployment is 10% next year, as they did not in 2011. We remember this. This is living memory of the people who run the Democratic Party.
That was 9 years ago. That was 9 years ago.
Next year is insane.
That was 9 years ago. Nobody remembers that. There's no one possibly. And I just want to explain what you're suggesting so that people understand this. You could fashion the bill in such a way where it is, we're going to benchmark. If unemployment is at this level, then this amount of unemployment insurance must be flooded into the system. If it is at another level, a higher or lower level, there's a commensurate amount. Make all of this automatic, so you don't have to go back to Mitch McConnell every time and say, hey, please, people are suffering. And he goes, I don't care. You're a Democratic president. Our job is to get you out of office. We're willing to let people suffer if we think it's going to help our fortunes in the midterms. And so that's basically what we're looking at, right? Is this system where there are benchmarks that automatically, and these are what we mean by automatic stabilizers, where it kicks in based upon the feedback it's getting from the economy.
Absolutely. And the automaticness of it is both makes it more effective, but also takes off these political ransom moments that are really destabilizing for our ability to answer these problems. And a lot of thinking had been going into this for the last couple of years. And the fact that none of it was taken up here, I think, is really disappointing. It may have been a very hard ask. I was not involved in the negotiations at all, but the fact that it's not even really broached, and crucially, the fact that the House is not flagging this as the alternative, makes me think that they're going to be outmaneuvered quite significantly.
I mean, the idea that like we had such a recent example of this on some level, and it does feel like who can remember all that stuff that happened? I mean, it really is. It's shocking. But Mike, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this. People can check out more of your work at the Roosevelt Institute. And what is your Twitter still Rorty Bomb?
It's still Rorty Bomb, RORTYBOMB. And you can check me out on Twitter too. That's where I'll link all my stuff.
That's where I see it all. Mike, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, folks. We're going to do it a little bit different because we've got two basic, another facet of what we were talking about in terms of phase 4 is going to be voting. And we're seeing a perfect example of the crap show. It is unimaginable what is taking place over the past, I guess, I don't know how many hours that is, 72 hours. The long and short of it is that Evers, the governor of Wisconsin, was a little bit late and a little bit timid in pressing the Republican legislature in Wisconsin. Now, there are a couple of things you have to remember. The Democrats got over 50% of the votes in the last election in Wisconsin for state representatives. 50% of the votes across the board. 50, I think it's 52 or 54 or 51. Because of gerrymandering, Republicans won 64% of the seats that make up the state legislature. When there is an attempt to push back and say, hey, this is not the way that democracy works. If you get more than 50% of the votes, you should have at least close to 50% of the elected representatives. We're going to take this to the state Supreme Court. But the state Supreme Court is dominated by conservatives, and they say the gerrymander is fine. So it was 54% of voters chose a Democratic candidate for the state assembly. Republicans have, they now have 63 of the state's 99 assembly seats. That's messed up. They keep that gerrymander in. They pass laws like they did on Friday of last week saying we're not going to postpone the primary because there is a re-election of, or I should say a new election for a new state Supreme Court justice. And they had seen that absentee ballots coming in from Waukesha County were outpacing Milwaukee County significantly. So they said, we've got the votes. You got to have the vote on Tuesday of this week. And we're going to appeal the decision that said that you could extend the absentee ballots to the 13th because people didn't know that they needed to get them because they didn't realize it was going to be so difficult to vote because of coronavirus. The U.S. Supreme Court just basically said, nope, they've got to be in by today. And if they're not, the vote doesn't count. Meanwhile, there are five polling places in Milwaukee when usually there are, I think, like 500. We can ask, maybe there's 70. I don't know. I can tell you it's a fraction. We'll ask John Nichols, who's on the ground in Wisconsin, in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program the national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine and the host of the podcast Next Left for The Nation magazine, John Nichols. John, welcome back to the program.
It's an honor to be with you, my friend.
You've got a new cover story for The Nation magazine called How to Win in Wisconsin. That is obviously about the general election. But there's also there's an election today. One of those things being, it's obviously a Democratic primary, but it's also an election for the state Supreme Court. Back up and walk us through how in the world there is a primary election today in Wisconsin when we have seen the data as to how Michigan having their primary may have increased the infection rate of coronavirus. I mean, what we've seen in the past, like 48 hours, has been every single problem with the courts and their involvement in our election process that one could imagine, it seems.
You are correct, my friend. Wisconsin, my home state, my family's home state for 6 generations, historically had two things that were really great about it: terrific elections and, frankly, a really strong commitment to public health. It was a state that in the influenza epidemic of 1918 did dramatically better than the rest of the country because it was about the only place that actually locked down. And so Wisconsin has all these great traditions. Unfortunately, they have intersected with the horrible politics of our times. So on this day, April 7th, Wisconsin had a scheduled election. A lot of people nationally are focusing on the presidential primary, the Democratic primary especially, and also to some extent on the state Supreme Court race. It's important to understand that this is also a day when literally hundreds of local offices, city council, county board, mayors, village presidents are elected, including the mayor of Milwaukee is up for election, the county executive of Milwaukee County, our largest city, largest county. So it's actually a very big election day. And the interesting thing is that there's a lot at stake for conservatives and for progressives. It's very typical in this deeply divided state. But here's where things really came apart. Every state that had an election scheduled in this period, as this pandemic has risen to a level that it's the focus of everything going on in the country, as well as the economic downturn. Every state that in this period right now had a primary has moved it. They have generally moved it to early June. In Wisconsin, because we have divided government, a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature, was much more difficult to do that. The governor tried to work with the legislature repeatedly. He called them into special session. He did negotiations, everything to try to delay this election, to postpone it. The Republicans refused. So finally, yesterday afternoon, Governor Tony Evers announced in the early afternoon that he was postponing in-person voting because public health people had said he should do it. Civil rights and voting rights groups had said he should do it. The mayors of all of our major cities said he should do it. I mean, there was this overwhelming call to postpone in a graceful way. What he said was absentee ballots that have already been cast will be counted. People can continue casting absentee ballots into June. And then in early June, if indeed we've passed through the worst of this pandemic, we may also have in-person voting. But he canceled the in-person voting for today. Republicans in the legislature immediately objected. They had mocked him. They had ridiculed him. They had attacked him. They had refused to cooperate with him on this. And then they attacked him for taking action. They sued in the state Supreme Court and within hours got a state Supreme Court from a majority on that court that is closely aligned with the Republicans in the legislature, blocking what the governor had done. And then the U.S. Supreme Court, responding to another conservative lawsuit, upended absentee voting. And so we have this horrible situation today where across Wisconsin, tens of thousands of people are lining up to go to polling places. And they're doing so at a point where we believe the majority of poll workers are not going to be working, where cities across the state have had to dramatically reduce their number of polling places. In Milwaukee, for instance, they have 180 polling places. Their system was set up because that was the number that was needed for a city of that size. They now have 5. and the lines to vote in those 5 polling places go around blocks, down streets, through parking lots. It is a nightmare scenario where the county executive of Milwaukee County says the coronavirus will be spread further because of the decisions made by the courts and these Republican politicians, and where the county executive says more people will die.
It is there's so much to be just completely both enraged and just and shocked by. I mean, the idea that the United States Supreme Court would look at this and not even consider, would narrowly tailor their question in such a way so as to completely disenfranchise. I mean, you're disenfranchising people in about 6 different ways in this instance. I exaggerated the number of polls in Milwaukee, but I mean, people should just contemplate for a moment. 180 down to 5. I mean, there's no physical way for those 5 polling places to even provide a fraction of the opportunity to vote that 180 would. I mean, I guess technically a fraction, but it is like it is what? It's
a small fraction.
2%, right? I mean, that's basically what it is.
And let me give you another example, my friend, just to say that this is statewide. It's not just in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is where, we've had the highest level of coronavirus cases, where we have had the highest level of deaths. And so it's a particular concern for a whole bunch of reasons. But in Waukesha, a community with a substantial Latino population, they had dozens of polling places. They're down to 1. In communities across the state where you had many, many polling places, they're down to 1 or 2. And there was a report late last week that as many as 100 jurisdictions simply did not have poll workers. And they just didn't have people to do it.
And is my understanding correct that the Republican-controlled legislature is aware that there has been a more absentee ballots coming in from Waukesha, which is traditionally, those absentee ballots come in from Waukesha, that is traditionally Republican voters. Is that right?
I think that they, in anticipation of this moment, there's no question that they ramped up their advocacy for absentee voting in the last week or so as this issue heightened. Now, it's true that also there's a large level of absentee voting in much of the state because people were scared, and a lot of people put in applications. But here's where things really get. Sam,
I'm sorry, we lost you for a second.
You're right that in some places, what's that?
We lost you for 1 second.
Oh, I was going to say, here's where things get incredibly messy. There was in some places you had early messages to get your absentee ballot, do it, take care of it. But there's a lot of the state where people traditionally vote in person. It's just how it's been for a very long time. And I'm one of those people who historically has voted in person. And as this crisis came, you had a late surge of people asking for absentee ballots, particularly from Milwaukee County and from Racine, from Beloit, places with large African-American and Latino populations, and a lot of large working class populations. People saying, oh, I better not do what I usually do, which is to vote in person, but to get an absentee ballot. It was such a crushing, overwhelming demand from these places that clerks were working in some cases as many as 110 hours a week to get the ballots turned around. A federal judge last Friday said, this is too overwhelming. While he did not postpone the election, he did extend the amount of time when you could apply for an absentee ballot. And then he extended the amount of time in which you could get it through the mail, fill it out, get it back, and have it processed. And so basically he gave another week into early next week to kind of make this whole process work. It was a practical decision that simply extended the absentee balloting. And the Supreme Court yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court shut that down.
That's what's so
as of this afternoon.
That's what's so amazing about that ruling. They knew that people were operating under the understanding that they had a couple of extra days to get that ballot in, and without any warning basically said wrong, no, end of story. I mean, that's what's so That's one of the things that's so shocking about this. Let me ask you this, John. Why couldn't in Ohio, DeWine did not cancel the election? What he did was he said the election can take place, but the Board of Health or the state's health department said stay at home order. You can't go out. So the election will take place, but you can't do it. Why didn't they do that in Wisconsin?
They did. Essentially, what Tony Evers announced yesterday afternoon, Monday afternoon at around 1 o'clock, was essentially what DeWine had done. He said we can't do now he took the responsibility on himself personally. DeWine had his health secretary step up and do it, but the health secretary for Wisconsin administrator was right there with Evers, and so it's the same as Ohio. What Evers said was we can't do in-person voting, and so we're just going to extend the election. We're gonna open things up so that we can have absentee voting for a longer period. We can get through this confusing moment, and we'll make it all work. The parallels to what DeWine did in Ohio are pretty amazing. It's very, very similar, except for one difference. In Ohio, DeWine was a Republican governor with a Republican legislature and, frankly, a sympathetic state Supreme Court. In Wisconsin, Evers is a Democratic governor with a incredibly belligerent Republican legislative leadership. They have tried to undermine him at every point, and a Supreme Court that is aligned with that leadership. And so what you need to understand, this is an important thing, is this isn't simply Republican or Democrat, because DeWine's a Republican. Many Republican governors have delayed elections. This isn't conservative or liberal, because there have been conservatives who've delayed elections. This is win at any cost, spiteful, abusive hackery on the part of Republicans who think that if they game this process, if they narrow this process, maybe they Supreme Court. I wish I could see some lighter way of referring to it, but I can't see anything. I cannot see any redemptive choice that was made here. I think it was made entirely to thwart the governor's efforts to have a safe and fair election.
The next question I was going to ask you was, how will Wisconsin respond to this? Because, I remember I was out there for the protests against Scott Walker when he was cutting things like Badger Care and making Wisconsin a right to work state. And then I remember when the recall of Walker failed because people just didn't like the idea of the recall. They found it sort of impolite on some level. And I was going to ask, how are Wisconsin voters responding to the idea that all these people are going to be, that it's going to spread the coronavirus, or has a chance to, or it's at the very least risking it? And then it occurs to me, it's like, they've already got this that rigged. I mean, if they get the Supreme Court, if they get one more seat on the Supreme Court, they've already got the place jerry rigged. You need at least, 54% of the vote only gets you, 60 gets you only, whatever it is, 42 elected representatives. You'd have to get 70% of the vote to win the state house. And they just have locked it in some way, and they just don't care, do they?
I think you're speaking to a lot of the reality. Let's first off make it clear. We know how Wisconsin thinks about delaying the election. There was a terrific poll done by our top polling group, the Marquette University Law School poll last week, in which an overwhelming majority of Wisconsinites said postpone the election. Move it. They basically said do exactly what Evers did yesterday. So by a 54 to 42 margin, and that was even before things had reached their peak or started to move toward their peak, they said delay. So the people of Wisconsin wanted this delayed. The mayors of our major cities said delay this. There's no doubt where sentiment is, but you are right, Sam. You were talking about, frankly, a gerrymandering of the legislature and a host of other interventions, including a lot of big money from the Koch brothers and others, that has sought to make Wisconsin a historic swing state into a Republican state. Now, here's the interesting thing. In 2018, they had everything in play to reelect Scott Walker statewide.
No, we lost you.
And so, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In 2018, I don't know, where'd you lose me in that?
Just they had everything in play to reelect Scott Walker.
They had everything in play to reelect Scott Walker, and yet Democrats won every single statewide race. They won for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, state treasurer, and U.S. Senate. And so we know that the people of Wisconsin, at least we have good evidence. The question is how much they will lean and how much they may be influenced by what has happened. Clearly, the Republicans have done everything they can to gerrymander, to jerry-rig the elections of this state. But what they have done this week, in fact, this last 24 hours, is so shocking, so jarring, that one would hope that people will remember. And I think that's a part of our duty in this time. Our first duty is to keep ourselves. Our second duty is to survive this economic crash and to make sure that our communities do the same. Our third duty is to protect democracy and to make sure that our civic and democratic life survives so that when this is done, we can elect leaders who will care for us. But our fourth duty, I believe, related to that third one, is to take names, to remember who let us down, who exploited us in this time, and to hold them to account. And I can tell you, I, as a writer and a commentator, am gonna do that. I am not going to forget what the state Supreme Court, what the U.S. Supreme Court, and what these legislators did. It is unconscionable to ask grandmothers on the north side of Milwaukee to get up before dawn and to get on a bus and to ride through the city for to wait in line for hours to cast a ballot amidst the pandemic.
John, before I let you go, one thing that I've been reading about has been, and this is a phenomenon that's not just happening in Milwaukee, it's happening in Louisiana, I believe. I think it's happening in Detroit. We obviously don't have a full set of data on this, but ProPublica has a piece about early data that shows that almost half of Milwaukee's counties, almost 1,000 cases, and 81% of its 27 deaths in a county are African Americans. And this is a population, the county, the population is 26% Black. Do you have a sense of what accounts for that?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of things, and I'm not a public health expert, so I'll put that up front. But we have seen an underfunding of Milwaukee and of Milwaukee County in recent years by the state, certainly during the Walker years. Though Scott Walker, our former governor, was from Milwaukee County, he regularly attacked it and was very, very critical of it. We have seen an underfunding of our healthcare system in Wisconsin that is extreme. It has undermined elements of our healthcare system. This is a state where the Republicans refused to cooperate with the Affordable Care Act, refused to take the Medicare, Medicaid money that they could. Now the governor, our current governor, the Democratic governor, has done a lot in the last year to try and fill that void. But you had the better part of 10 years of underfunding and neglect. And I think that in combination with systemic racism and all of the issues that extend from that, especially in urban areas and especially in Milwaukee, have created a situation where something very horrific is happening. And that is that this disease is being concentrated in certain communities. The same thing is happening in Chicago, by the way, and in some other cities. We don't know the full play out of it, but the fact of the matter is the evidence that ProPublica and others Hello. And it also, frankly, it relates back to the issues that we're talking about, because if indeed we have a city, Milwaukee, where you have a large number of African Americans who have tested positive, and too large number who have already died. The idea that you would reduce the number of polling places, people to move about at significant levels and wait in line for hours it's a particularly awful choice made by our politicians at this time.
John Nichols, I know you have a new article up, an interview with Bernie Sanders, specifically about the coronavirus. It's at The Nation magazine. I've yet to read it, but that's literally on my list of things to do immediately after the show today. Appreciate your taking the time today, and hang in there and stay safe.
I will do that. I hope you will do the same, and I hope all your listeners do the same as well. Thanks for focusing on these important issues.
All right, John Nichols. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. All right, folks, we're going to head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will play some video, and I don't know how fun it's going to be today. We'll try. Tomorrow on the program, Michael Brooks will be here, and then later in the program, Nomiki Konst will be here. Nomiki Konst. I'll get it down eventually. I'll figure that out. I can just say it like a knee jerk. Appreciate your joining us. Glad we could stream the whole way through. That went well. Mission accomplished, Matt.
Hell yeah. Crushing it.
Still there?
Yep. Crushing it today.
I had a little problem on my Skype machine, but I think I know what the issue was. I think Mila was doing too many TikTok videos. But we will endeavor to persevere. You can support this program by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you get extra content every day, and you keep this show chugging along through an era where I think we're going to hit, we're going to have some advertising issues. We will be here, but if you are in a position of supporting the show, now would be a good time to do it. If you are someone who wants access to the content, but you don't have the financial means, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Right, I want the show or something to that effect, and we will get to you as soon as possible. Also, help us out. Sign up and listen to the AM Quickie. It's free, completely free. You can go to amquickie.com, or you can find it on your podcast subscription service. 7 minutes a day. Listen to it, enjoy it, gives you a sense of what the big stories are of the day. And also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. I have now moved into I'm drinking a full pitcher of this during the show. I don't know if you picked up on that, but that is, of course, the MR blend. I did get another bag. I got 2 5-pound bags that were shipped to me. I did get another bag, and no, it is not the WTF blend. I would never. My second favorite is Los Diosos. And fair trade, 10% off if you use the coupon code majority. Go order some of that coffee. They're great to their producers. They're a co-op. That's like a quadruple win. So check that out. Tonight is Tuesday. Michael Brooks will be streaming the Michael Brooks Show. You can go to patreon.com/TMBS or to youtube.com, The Michael Brooks Show, to watch that tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Matt, do you have any idea who's going to be on? He's really good about communicating this stuff. Also, check out the Antifada. Jamie is got a new one coming out this week, as well as her vampire podcast. You can check out the Antifada at patreon.com/the Antifada. And of course, Matt, Literary Hangover. You guys are going gangbusters over there.
Yeah, we are. It's crazy. Most recent episode about Afroben's 1689 play about Bacon's rebellion. We talk about some of the radical influences of the rebellion, such as the Levelers, who, when they delegated power, said it was a matter of convenience and that power still always resided in the people, which I think is an interesting concept that maybe we should bring some more of that back. But check that more recent episode
It's getting much
out.
bigger these days.
Patreon.com/literary hangover.
All right, folks, quick break. Fun half, number 646-257-3920.
Plugs and notices.
Oh, right. Yes. Thank you, Brendan. Folks, this is plugs and notices. We usually do this up front, but I think we're going to start doing it at the end of the show. And there are COVID-19 plugs and notices for April 7th, 2020. You can find these on YouTube. All the links that we talk about in this will be posted under the YouTube description and in the podcast pass around. If you have one to send it to us at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Right in the subject line, plugs and notices. Kevin writes, just want to send this out to the Chicago community. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor with Art of Balance, trying to get the word out about remote mental health services that are offered on a sliding scale basis, with our interns being able to offer pro bono therapy. We have a handful of counselors working with a variety of communities, but in particular, the LGBT community. I work primarily with the trans community. So anyone needing mental health at this time, just want to send out the signal. It's there for them. You can go to Art of Balance, CHI for Chicago, artofbalancechi.com, or you can send an email to reveal@artofbalancechi.com. Union County of New Jersey Mutual Aid is sponsoring a fundraiser for the Elizabeth Coalition to house the homeless. The coalition is a longstanding feature in the Elizabeth, New Jersey community. Donations can be made through Facebook or just search for fundraiser for Elizabeth Coalition. That's from Mar. I work for a nonprofit that deals in small businesses lending in New York City. Our nonprofit is dispersing loans for small businesses affected by COVID-19 through the 5 boroughs. Below is a link that has all the information. This is at ny.org, renaissance-ny.org. We're offering $50,000 at 3% interest rate for a term of up to 48 months. Please note that as a nonprofit organization, we have a limited amount that we can be lending. So this program is on a first come, first served basis. I know that getting funds set aside by the CARES Act is difficult for some small business owners in New York that are underbanked and have language barriers. We deal with these communities on a daily basis. We're open to serve. It's from listener Jonathan at the Renaissance Economic Development Corp. So check that out. And lastly, Brendan writes, I wanted to give a shout out to Ray Lenzi. He's running for Congress in Illinois' 12th district as a progressive Democrat and won a tough primary to be the Democratic nominee. He's running against Mike Bost, very much a Trump Republican. District nearly flipped blue last election. Lenzi has a good shot at it. Check out Lenzi, Lenzi, for FOR, Congress.org to look at his platform and drop him a donation if you can. Brendan writes, MR turned me from a right-wing Glenn Beck fan in high school to voting for Bernie in my very first presidential election this year. Left is best. Keep up the fight. Good for you. Thanks for the email. And check that out. All of these links will be available on our YouTube page. All you got to do is Google plugs and notices 47 COVID-19 plugs and notices 47 YouTube Sam Cedar. You will find it. All right, folks, quick break. Fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
Do.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report. This is the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, I got something really fun for you. Here's a funny story about how they gave billions of dollars in the stimulus to corporations, but only under the requirements that there is an inspector general who's going to make sure that no hanky panky happens, because Donald Trump has a little problem with the cookie jar, and Donald Trump just fired him. Don't need an inspector general, right? How does that happen?
There's a little Latin. It's Latin, Sam. It's law, but a little thing called Watchdog Sesame. So
Not
he
Latin.
goes away.
Watchdog Sesame. A panel of inspector generals had named Glenn Fine, this is the acting Pentagon watchdog, to lead the group charged with monitoring the coronavirus relief effort. But Trump on Monday removed Fine from his post, instead naming the EPA inspector general to serve as the temporary Pentagon watchdog in addition to his other responsibilities. Which right-wing lunatic appointed this EPA inspector general? Good thing James Clyburn's just looking forward, not looking backward. Got in just under the wire. Now he won't have to look at this, too. Unbelievable. On Ring of Fire, I'm going to be talking to Jeff Hauser about this very question, about the failure of the Democrats to provide any oversight. I mean, not just to like the sort of I mean, like just even stuff like this. There's no mechanism. There's no mechanism to say, hey, this is wrong. Me sitting in a closet with a IKEA backdrop saying that this is wrong is just not going to cut it, with all due respect to me. You know, Donald Trump just does not believe in inspector generals. Here is Donald Trump being asked a question from Kristen Fisher of Fox News. That's why I only listen to OWN now. I only watch that. When she's asking Donald Trump about a report that says hospitals do not have adequate testing and they do not have adequate supplies. And this is what Donald Trump says. This is clip number 1.
Despite the nearly 1.8 million tests that you say the United States has done, the Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services released a report today, a survey of more than 300 hospitals across the country. And the number one complaint from those hospitals were severe shortages of testing supplies and a really long wait time. I mean, a week or longer.
And did I hear the word Inspector General? Really? It's wrong. And they'll talk to you about it. It's wrong.
But this is your own government.
Well, where did he come from, the Inspector General? What's his name?
It came from the Inspector General.
What's his name?
I don't know his name.
Well, find me his name. Let me know, okay? If you find me his name, I'd appreciate it.
But, sir, these are hospitals.
All I can tell you is this: we put up on the board. You're going to ask the Admiral, but we are doing.
Who say that they're waiting a week or longer to get their test results. Why?
But we've done more testing and had more results than any country anywhere in the world. They're doing an incredible job. Now they're all calling us. They want our testing. What are we doing? How do you do the 5-minute test? How do you do the 15-minute test? So give me the name of the Inspector General. Could politics be entered into that?
Yeah. We love you so much. How do you look so good? Where do you get that tan? He's lying. I know this is going to come as a shock to you, but we are not leading the world in tests or testing or anything like that.
Yeah. You're going to ask the Admiral about that.
Yeah, ask the Admiral. Admiral. He's an admiral, and you're not even a private. Inspector General. Oh, those words. Well, I've got an admiral, he's not even an inspector. He's just a regular admiral. Gringo Castro on the IM. How is concentrating urban voters during this crisis not attempting mass murder? I mean, I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know what the answer is because I mean, it's just stunning. It's just stunning. You can IM the show via the app at majorityapp.com. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 408 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello.
Hello.
Is this me?
It is you. Who's this?
Hi. This is Sarah, still in Indiana.
Sarah in Indiana. What's on your mind, Sarah?
Hi. So I guess I wanted to point out one thing and give listeners a few tips.
Okay.
So something I've noticed is people are talking about like grocery cashiers are essential workers, which they're not really. Like the food is there, whether the company is profiting off it or not. Like if it's on the shelves, we have food. It's just like, it's hard to separate out the essential workers when profit is like the priority over human life. And we have the same like distribution system for essentials like food and medical equipment as for things like furniture and pens and hair dye and stuff.
Okay.
And I also have a few, so like personally, I shoplift a lot. I think it's like, totally appropriate to reappropriate the commons. And so I just wanted to give some tips for that.
You want to give some tips for shoplifting?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I don't want to advocate shoplifting, but I am also curious as to what the tips are. So let's hear it.
Yeah. So personally, I usually do it. I have this like zip up hoodie with baggy sleeves, which looks less suspicious to loss prevention than like a closed front one where you can slip something up the front. But I usually like slip things into my sleeves and then from there into like a purse or a big pocket. I also find it useful to carry things in my basket or cart until I like reach an area with like less surveillance.
And then what do? You ditch the cart. You ditch the cart and then run out of the store.
No. See, I actually like move through the store normally. Even like buy a few things at the end, and just like carry things.
You'll actually buy things.
Around.
You'll actually buy things.
I buy it.
Oh, so
I buy a few things.
I see.
So that it looks like it's like natural store visit.
And are there specific stores that you will go to? Like, I mean, do you
mostly Walmart?
Okay, so you'll just basically you'll go to Walmart. You won't go into like a mom and pop store.
I mean, I would go into a mom and pop store, but Walmart is like more convenient generally. I don't think like small business owners are like evil for exploiting people, because we all like exploit people under capitalism, but I'm not going to like give them a total pass either and just be like, yeah, like lick their boots over it,
Well, I mean, there seems to be like a little bit of a difference between licking their boots and not stealing their stuff.
Well, they're not using the stuff.
Right.
They're like hoarding it and selling it.
I see. And so in the absence, I'm just curious, in the absence, I mean, look, I don't feel terribly strongly about Walmart. I think they're an abusive company. But in the absence of these people doing that, I mean, you think that the government should produce and distribute these goods?
I mean, I do think that like there should be separate, or like, I don't know, some way to prioritize essential goods. And
don't you? I'm just curious what the idea is.
It's just like very difficult in a system where profit is totally prioritized.
I get what you're saying.
Over all else.
I get that. But the mom and pop store, let's say, and I don't know how many of those exist, but I certainly know some. Or let's say a co-op. In the absence of them providing it, like how would we get these essential goods?
In the absence of stores selling them?
Yeah.
Or what? I mean, like the labor theory of value, right? Like,
yeah, no, I'm not saying that there aren't ways. I'm just curious as to what I understand that there are ways that we do it. I'm just curious as to, what your perspective is. I mean, I'm conscious of the different ways in which we could do this. I'm just curious as to what your perspective is.
I mean, my perspective is things should be a lot more localized. We should shut down a lot of industries. People should be more focused on like sustainable food production. We have a lot of bullshit work, quote unquote, and like totally useless jobs. They're just like manufactured to keep us like tired and complacent. And so I think like it's also really important to like move towards sustainable and localized food systems.
What do you do if you live in a city?
Sorry, what?
What do you do if you live in a big city?
I mean, I don't know. I don't like have all the solutions for this.
All right.
Like there's anyway. Oh, I have one thing to say. My friend in El Paso is running a GoFundMe called El Paso Housing Fund, organized by Maria and Azola. They're raising money for trans women, Black women, Indigenous people, and children to have shelter and clean water during this time. So please go check that out.
Send me an email with that link, and we'll read it on the plugs and notices.
All right, thanks.
All right, appreciate the call. Interesting perspective. I do think that there is probably a middle ground between bootlicking the mom and pop store or the small co-op and stealing their stuff. I think that you can go in and be really rude to them or something like that. Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh, you know who this is.
Kowalski. Was that you on the phone yesterday for like an hour or 2 hours, and I couldn't, for whatever reason, I picked up?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I actually didn't have any internet yesterday, so calling into the show was the only way to really listen to it. And I mean, I literally had no data whatsoever. I was in a valley.
Wow. All right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, quite useful. Also,
Yes.
interesting
Super
last
pricey.
caller,
Super pricey for me. But go ahead.
Well, your last caller kind of makes me want to talk about some of the anarchist cookbook at the moment, but probably not the right place for that.
Okay.
So I was calling in to basically share that I may have underestimated the impact on the rural areas because my home city is about to get hit pretty hard with this virus. The National Guard is setting up a temporary hospital tent, and I have a relative who's a nurse at the local hospital and says that they're pretty much bracing for like proportional New York numbers. So
Wow. And
not good.
yeah, I mean, this is the problem is that, all it takes is, one or two people who have it. And then
they traced it to what happened. There was a quinceanera that had about 300 people at it about 3 weeks ago. For sure, someone there was confirmed with it. And we haven't shut down the meatpacking plant yet. And if you think that that's where the big concentration came from, they're not 100% certain because we also live along the interstate. So not good.
and the resources.
Governor has not called off the election yet, but I mean, it's the second week of May, so I'd be surprised if we'll be fine by then.
I think this is going to be the dynamic. I mean, I think if March, April was the story of some of the urban centers in this country, I think April, May is going to be the story of rural areas. And I think it's going to be, there's not going to be the same level of media attention because obviously these things are going to be much more disparate. And there is, to the extent that New York was overwhelmed in terms of equipment and capacity, it's going to be, I think, worse in small rural communities because how do you aggregate this stuff? And in New York.
Well, not only that, I mean, you got to figure for the last 10 years about, in some states it's been as high as like 40%, but I think in Nebraska, about a quarter of all rural healthcare providers have been operating in the red. So basically, like, if they're lucky, they get a grant to stay open. But you have like vast areas of the state that just kind of like food deserts. They have literally healthcare providing deserts. You have to go hundreds of miles or like 100 miles to get to a care facility. So I mean, like, this is one of those things that advocating for Medicare for all, because as I've said, like, there would be permanent money flows going to these areas that just are not profitable. Like, there would be extra clinics and hospitals in rural areas, in low-income urban areas that, like, they simply exist. You would have more equipment. Because I had an old professor when I was in college. He basically specialized in healthcare, and this is why it's one of the things that I know a decent bit about. And basically, our healthcare system is designed to handle 180 million people, maybe, because when it is a commodity-based thing and half of the country just cannot use it, you do not have the infrastructure for it. So we just simply do not have the resources.
it's like on-demand supply lines, essentially. And because we artificially, I guess, depress the demand for these things, that by basically making it unaffordable for a certain amount of people, we don't have the capacity when more than that amount of people needs it. And stay safe, Kowalski. Give us updates.
Oh, there is one more thing if I have time.
Go ahead.
So I got a buddy who's in the Army. He basically deals with the logistics of moving stuff. He says he doesn't understand why basically the National Guard was not given the ability to distribute products because we have the infrastructure to do it. So basically, from what I can gather, is basically the assessment you came up with is that people are just simply trying to profit off of this because, as he put it, the U.S. military has more than enough trucks, equipment, and logistics infrastructure to tend to the entire country's needs.
Of course.
In
New York.
This goes back to like when I was talking about, if the one thing we've always invested in is a military, this is the one time you could have used it and it would have done some damn good. Like all of our ships have medical personnel on it, like naval ships. Easiest places to quarantine, those people could be in New York helping right now with manpower shortages. Like this was the one time they could have easily used our biggest asset to want to just have a hammer, but we didn't. We're not using it.
Yeah, and
it's probably to make money.
In New York State,
pathetic thing.
In New York State, Cuomo has used the National Guard basically as the requisitioning and assessment teams in hospitals throughout the state. So in every hospital throughout the state, maybe not every, but almost every, I'm talking private, I'm talking religious, I'm talking state and city hospitals, there is a National Guardsman or two or three or National Guards person, and their job is to determine what are the supplies that the hospital has, what are the supplies the hospital needs, report that into a central headquarters, and then the state says, okay, we've got extra ventilators in, downstate or upstate. We're going to send that down. We've got extra medical personnel out on Long Island. We're going to send them to, I don't know, to Putnam County, whatever it is. And they're coordinating all this. You could have landed those ventilators, those N95 masks, those gowns, whatever, put them at a requisition, I don't know, at various airfields around the country or National Guards bases. I mean,
the National Guard has helicopters and every hospital has a helipad.
Of course. I mean, it's a racket. I mean, it's worse than a racket. Appreciate the call.
That's not a federal thing, so it's pretty much pointless. But yeah, have a good one, guys.
You too. Hang in there. Stay safe. Jamie wants me to tell that last caller, I can't remember her name now, but she should listen to the Antifada. And the tagline for the Antifada is, we help super high anarchists develop their politics. So there it is. Sarah. Listener Sarah. Calling from an 845 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Teacher Lauren. How are you?
Teacher Lauren, how are you? What's going on?
Well, I guess I should say substitute Teacher Lauren. This is my 4th week out of work now since the school's shut down in New York State. But I guess that was kind of lucky for me because I was able to file for unemployment online before the website was crashing for everyone. We're having a bit of a different experience with the husband now because he's got his own construction company, which is currently shuttered. And when we went to apply online, they're like, you need to call to finish this application. And that was a week ago and hundreds of busy signals ago. So that's going to be kind of a painful.
Is he eligible for the small business loan?
He could be, but like he doesn't really have overhead aside from workman's comp insurance. He doesn't have employees, so to speak. He has two. The other guy has his own business, and if, I'm being completely blunt, everyone would benefit more from the expanded unemployment than they would from their regular paychecks.
Right.
Just the application process is a bitch now. But I mean, if you search, New York State Department of Labor on Twitter, everyone and their mother is tweeting about the same thing, that they have to call to finish their applications and they can't get through. So apparently they're saying that even if you are late filing, they're going to backdate your claims to the day that you were out of work. And this is just in New York State. So if you're listening from other parts of the country, I don't know what that state's doing. But I was able to find some information about when they are paying out the expanded unemployment, and that's also varying state by state. But if you're in New York and you're already getting the checks, you're going to see that first $600 this week.
Oh, that's good.
So that is good. And on that note, I am one of those people who will be making more on unemployment than I was working, and Lindsey Graham can suck it.
Right. Go suck it, Lindsey Graham. Well, Teacher Lauren, I'm glad you guys are doing okay. Good luck with your husband.
Thank you, Sam. We love you.
Lindsey Graham can suck it. Can't find anything wrong with that statement. Rick from Florida. Hey, Sam, I'm having a hard time figuring out to what extent this primary result was inevitable because of the structural power dynamics in play versus a series of actual strategic errors from Bernie's team. If you were in charge of Sanders' campaign and could go back to late February following the Nevada caucus, when he was widely considered the frontrunner, what changes would you have made to overcome the consolidation of the Democratic establishment and the media's campaign of manufacturing consent? I don't look. It is super easy to, in hindsight, suggest ideas that may or may not have worked. Personally, from my perspective, I would go back before this. I would go back to that speech that he made about democratic socialism. And I would have expended my resources on, instead of trying to make people aware of democratic socialism, I would have simply said that he, as a democratic socialist, is essentially an FDR Democrat. And I would have tried to sell it along those lines. I would have been more circumspect back in February with, I would have been more, not conservative in terms of policies, but more conservative in terms of like demeanor and projecting, sort of, I would have said less about the establishment of Republican and Democratic parties. Would that have made a difference? I don't know. I don't know if any of that would have made a difference. I don't know. I mean, the media certainly was involved in this, but you did start to see elements of that media become to sort of like come to grips with the idea that Bernie was going to be the nominee. And so it really was a function of convincing, of Obama convincing a couple of people to basically endorse Biden. And I don't know if there was any way to have stopped that. I don't know. But there would have been things that I would have done that would have like maybe set things up a slightly different, but I don't know that would have made any difference. Colin from Nebraska, Business Insider says paper checks could be delivered to last known address anywhere between late April and early September. Unbelievable. Local pizza historian, going to be wild in November when Bernie Sanders write-in wins the election because all the establishment voters committed mass suicide on the altar of not delaying their primaries. Lying face pony soldier. Where have all the libertarian callers been? Wondering why they haven't called in a while. Yes, I missed that. Hey, you. Check out some of the videos from Milwaukee and Washtenaw County. Insane lines. Waukesha in particular. No one is social distancing in line. It's nuts. Here is some footage, actually, from Milwaukee and Waukesha counties where people have lined up starting this morning at 7 a.m. It's only 15 seconds of it, but here it is. The lines are going around the block. I mean, and these are big blocks, ladies and gentlemen. It's nuts. People are social distancing. Oh my God. That's crazy. Wow. There is no way when you have 180 polling places in a regular election that you can do it with 5 polling places. You just simply cannot. And incidentally, that line's not moving at all. Here is Joe Biden. This is real leadership, ladies and gentlemen. And that leadership is, I'm going to pretend like I don't know the implications of this primary. Here it is. This is clip number 7. Joe Biden. He's talking about the convention. I can see if you are looking out at the convention in August, they've already postponed it. It's hard to assess whether, what the situation is there. But look at this clip.
Finally, sir, I want to turn to some politics before we go. As you know, Wisconsin now having its primary on Tuesday. Your opponent, Senator Sanders, has said that should be put off, and the governor now joined that chorus as well. But it looks like it's going to happen. Is that wise?
Well, look, I think they should just follow the science. What I've been hearing, I've been following like you have, like everybody has, watching the court action is still in court now. But I think whatever the science says is what we should do.
Pause it. Wrong answer. Wrong answer. I think, or let me put it, necessary but insufficient. You are a political leader. You know what the science says. You know what the science says. The science says, bad idea. The scientist didn't say we should do a stay-at-home order, except unless you're voting. Except unless you're congregating in specific areas, for the purpose of voting. That's not what the scientists say. You don't have to be a prominent YouTube commentator commentating in front of an IKEA backdrop to know that the scientists say bad idea. If you are a political leader who is the presumptive nominee of the party, and I think he is all but the nominee, you should say bad idea. It's a bad idea. Continue.
And does that hold for the convention as well? Are you open to the idea that it just may not be possible to do the convention in August?
Well, we're going to have to do a convention, may have to do a virtual convention. I think we should be thinking about that right now. The idea of holding a convention is going to be necessary, but we may not be able to put 10, 20, 30,000 people in one place, and that's very possible. Again, let's see where it is. What we do between now and then is going to dictate a lot of that as well. But my point is that I think you just got to follow the science.
One of the things that we're doing between now and then is we're putting people in Wisconsin at risk. So I repeat, Wisconsin, a bad idea. Convention, we should come up with alternate plans, but we don't know because that's in 4 months from now. But today, bad idea. Continue.
a lot of that as well. But my point is that I think you just got to follow the science. Listen to the experts. Listen to the Faucis of the world. And if that's the case, it's the case. But we cannot let this, we've never allowed any crisis from the Civil War straight through to the pandemic of 17, all the way around 16. We have never let our democracy second fiddle. We can both have a democracy and elections and at the same time correct the public health. But I think it's time we start thinking about how we're going to hold elections, whether we're going to have to and spend a lot of time figuring whether we do it. Is it going to mostly be by mail, which is not the preferred route for everyone? How are we going to do that? How are we going to make it available to everybody?
First off, 1918. That's when the Spanish flu pandemic happened. It lasted at least a year, maybe a year and a half. There was a 1918 midterm election. It's unclear as to, I'm not sure what the implications are if you could have fied it. But at that time, many states delayed their primaries. I think John Nichols told us earlier that they did it during the pandemic, and that's why Wisconsin was one of those states why they did so much better in terms of infecting people. So, fail. Here is this is unbelievable. Do you remember who Art Laffer is? Art Laffer is the guy who came up with the Laffer curve. He's the guy who said if you cut taxes on corporations and wealthy people enough, by cutting taxes, you will generate so much economic activity that you will actually raise the amount of revenue you derive from those lowered taxes. And Laffer had been going around for a long time with this Laffer curve, and he was advising Reagan back in the day. And finally, he had the opportunity to do a pure test. Took the state of Kansas when Sam Brownback became governor, I don't know, about 6 years ago now, maybe. And Brownback instituted this set of policies. And within 2 years, it got so bad. They had so many cuts to their public education system, to their college system, which was at one point like sort of the huge source of pride amongst Kansanians, whatever you call them, that the Republican legislature voted to raise taxes. And they took Sam Brownback, who was such an illustration of how effed up those policies are. They made him ambassador to faith. I'm not making that up. They just wanted to put him in the ether. So I don't even know where you live when you're the ambassador to faith. But he's out of the picture now. He's the ambassador to faith. But Art Laffer, he's still around. So isn't Stephen Moore. Such a huge joke that even Donald Trump said he was unfit to be on the Fed. Here is Sean Hannity basically saying that these two guys should make up the economic task force. Oh, God help us.
Tonight, I want to make one thing clear as we begin. We will get through this. We are the United States of America. And as we do, we need to also remember that the cure cannot be worse than the crisis itself. We cannot put paralyzing panic and over practical precautions above Americans working when now practical. Now, what does that mean? It means getting this country back to work, doing.
I'm very interested to find out what that means. Over practical solutions.
It means getting this.
Who was arguing for a long time that this was the basically the flu. Go back just a little bit.
working when now practical. Now, what does that mean? It means getting this country back to work, doing what we do best as soon as and safely as possible. It means doing everything we can do to find treatments and a cure. And like I've said, the idea of an economic task force seems like the right path to me. Bring in the minds like Art Laffer and Steve Moore and businessmen and women who understand Wall Street and Main Street. Also tonight, we have big developments on hydroxychloroquine. Dr.
Yes. Oh, it turns out Donald Trump also, incidentally, has interest in Novartis and in a French company. I can't remember what the name of it is that make hydroxychloroquine. Also, of course, golfing buddy has big interest in the company. I mean, of course. But apparently, Rudy Giuliani was in Ukraine and it found it there. I mean, we made a joke about it the other day, but it turned out to be true. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. This is lunacy. Apparently now Fox has gotten the message. We're going back, everybody. We're going to regret that the cure was worse than the disease. Here is Tucker Carlson. And, here's the game, folks. We got that call from Kowalski in Nebraska. And the game is this. And it's really, in many respects, a similar dynamic to health insurance and to healthcare costs. 80% of the healthcare costs in this country are borne by 20% of the people. That means for the vast majority of people, they don't realize how bad their health insurance was or is because they don't need it. The whole point of insurance is you're not sure if you're the person whose number is going to get called and you're going to have a disease, you're going to get hit by a bus or something like this. I think the game that Fox plays too is just like, there's going to be people who die, but we're just not going to be able to, they're not going to have access to a megaphone in such that people understand that this many people are dying. It's just going to be a number. We're not going to hear about, some small rural communities that have been devastated by this. We're not going to hear about the specific elements of suffering or immiseration. And so when this is over, we do know that everybody's going to suffer because of the economic crisis. And we can speak to that because the people who suffer from the disease will be isolated enough that it's going to sound more reasonable to talk about the economic stuff. Now, of course, it won't be the case for people who catch it, but this is just, I think, the game that they're playing. Here's Tucker Carlson parroting Sean Hannity, coincidentally, on the same night. Can you imagine?
Working is one activity we've decided should not be allowed. Jogging, fishing, golf, fine. Being employed, a massive threat to public health. We've decided that offices are somehow more dangerous than supermarkets, far more dangerous, though no one has to date bothered to explain how. The result of this? By some estimates, more than 17 million Americans are unemployed.
I'm going to do Tucker Carlson a solid, and I'm going to explain why offices might be more dangerous than supermarkets. There's two factors. One is that they probably are more dangerous because in an office, what you tend to do is sit with the same people and talk for extended periods of time. That's what we do in our office. Maybe people avoid Tucker in his office. But to the extent that we understand how this is transmitted, in those situations, there's more viral load in the air. You have more of an opportunity to catch it from someone else. In a supermarket, you're moving. You don't feel comfortable with the other people. You don't know them. Maybe you tend to keep your distance more. But then the other thing is we need food to eat. If we don't go into the supermarket for 2 weeks, many of us will have no food. If we don't go into the office for 2 weeks, we won't have money, but The government can provide us unemployment. The government can provide us grants, but they can't get us food in the same way. There it is.
How?
Run with that.
The result of this? By some estimates, more than 17 million Americans are unemployed right now. That's the highest number in the history of this country. A year from now, and we should think about this, how will all of us feel about the decisions we've made in the face of this pandemic? Is there a single person who sincerely expects the coronavirus itself will hurt more people in the end than the damage we're causing in our response to it? Probably not. Mass unemployment is almost certain to cause far more harm, including physical harm, to the average family than this disease.
If we did not take these measures, all of the models suggest, and they're just models, we don't know, maybe it could be worse. 2 million, 2.5 million people could die. Now, as people start to watch their neighbors and their friends dying, do you think you're going to run down to the office? Do you think you're going to go, like, I'm going to a concert. I've only seen 10 people die of this or 5 people die of this. I mean, these people are either idiots or just liars. There's no avoiding the economic implications of this. There's no avoiding it. Are you going to go out? If you think that the coronavirus is out there, are you going to go out and go along with your business and just like, I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. I'm just going into the office like nothing happened. We're going to plow through this thing. I'm going out to the movies. No, of course it's going to inhibit people's economic activity. And just to show his ignorance, he goes further. Play this.
Never minimize the danger of this pandemic or minimize our obligation to respond to it wisely. We've been saying that on this show for months. No thoughtful person wants to reopen baseball stadiums tomorrow or book a cruise to Shanghai. But there has to be a more balanced course than the one we are on now. For most people, going to work cannot be more dangerous than buying produce at Safeway twice a week. And if it is more dangerous, tell us how it is more dangerous and be specific when you describe that. Otherwise, it's time to start caring about the entire population. Healthy people are suffering badly too.
The reason why, I don't know who's telling you, but the reason why they're not telling you is because the dum-dums who you support in the White House have been in such denial and are subjugating the medical personnel that we don't have a straight answer for these things, because they fired all the people working on epidemics from the CDC in China. Because they fired the people whose job was to oversee a pandemic response on the National Security Council, they fired the people who are in charge of pandemic response in the Department of Homeland Security. We don't have answers. That is the big problem. We don't have answers. We don't have a mechanism to provide answers to Americans. So there is no way to simply say, like, okay, these people, it's safe for you to go back. These people, it's not. We don't have tests. If we had tests, it would be much easier. If we had the capacity to test people and say, okay, you've had it, you're okay, you can go in. You haven't had it, but you're in a low risk group, you can go in, but there needs to be masks. Everybody wears masks. You have not had it, you're in a high risk group, you cannot go in. But none of the things that we expect government to do, and frankly, just about any other government would do, have been done, largely because of ideology, also just because of sheer incompetence. An ideology that Tucker Carlson shares, and an incompetence that Tucker Carlson has been essentially tent polling and supporting for years now. Did that answer it for him? Lewis on the IM. in my opinion, this election can be won by a good third-party candidate, regardless of their ideology. I mean, it may be true, but you might be right. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if, I don't know who that would be. Oprah. Could Oprah win? If she jumped into the race. I don't know why she would, but I don't know what a good third party candidate means. I have a feeling that my definition of what a good third party candidate would not be the definition of the American voters who would vote for that third party candidate or not. Bingo Mosquito, do you think the Supreme Court would have made the same decision about Wisconsin if there was a sniper problem? I don't know. I think the Supreme Court would not have made the same decision about Wisconsin if there was a sense that the Democrats had the upper hand. Wolfie, love you all so much. Found you in 2015. I've watched or listened to you every day since. Thank you, Wolfie. King of all Pats fans. Sam, I have some tips for tagging overpasses with cartoonish pita shapes. Is it okay for me to share? Oh. Jamie's saying that supermarkets are dangerous too. The government should drop off supplies for people like they did in China. I mean, if there was a mechanism to do this, but I think China has a different social services. I think that funding the delivery of groceries would be good. But congressional baseball fan, the most frustrating part of this has been the way this administration and its supporters have gone out of their way to describe how math works. Mortality rate of 5% means a survival rate of 95%, even though 5% of the U.S. means multiple millions could die. But they argue that 5% is smaller than 95%. I don't even know how to combat this idiocy anymore. Do 3 strikes still make an out? Ryan's Edward Cole. I'm going to explain this. When you shoplift from corporations, you don't hurt the corporation. Loss is blamed on the store, and the management's answer to the loss in profits is to cut workers' hours. So the people you hurt are the minimum wage workers who are just trying to survive the end stages of the malignancy that is capitalism. From my experience, that is the case. I don't know if that happens with Walmart. I don't know if you could have, certainly if everybody went in there and shoplifted, that would be a major problem. Without a doubt, when you do it to a small business, you're basically just crushing people right off the bat. Carl Vandergeest. Hi, Sam. Here's some more shopping tips. Localize all government so that nobody catches you shoplifting. Oh, boy. I'm sorry. I don't know if I should have gone forward with that, but I was interested in the answer. Calling for 313 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. Is this me?
It is you. Who is you?
Hey, all right. I'm Greg. I'm from the suburbs of Detroit.
Suburbs of Detroit. Hello, Greg from the suburbs of Detroit.
Yeah. Finally, good to talk to you. Okay, so I wanted to talk about unemployment. This is the first time for a lot of us to be on unemployment. I've been on it once or twice in my life, and it is no picnic. Like normally, they will try and screw you out of your unemployment check any way that they can. If you have a 10-item checklist and you check 9 of them, but you didn't do the small little thing, yeah, they'll deny you the money. But more than that, the amount that you can actually get from unemployment here in Michigan was capped at $362. Doesn't matter how many kids you have, or if you're single, or if you're filed, whatever. It was capped at $362, which is tough to live on. I get paid $15 an hour. So I take home around $450 a week after taxes, which is still tough to live on. But on my unemployment, they only say that I am getting $300 at the best of times, at the best circumstances. my girlfriend, who's a nail tech, is only getting like $240, and that's before taxes. So she got her first payment today, which was $400 and something. I also called in to certify, and my money's supposedly on the way. So I've been hearing for years, like I grew up in a conservative household and conservative family, that, oh, unemployment workers are all lazy and they shouldn't get anything for free. You got to bootstrap it, yada, yada. Well, now they're all in the same boat as us. So, you know, now they're seeing it, that it's really not enough to get by. Now our landlord has, you know, given us emails and all this other kind of stuff and correspondence saying, yes, he does want the money that, you know, for the house that we're renting. And whenever we're saying, hey, we're only getting this much in unemployment, it's not enough. It's barely enough to cover bills and insurance and yada, yada. He keeps responding with, oh, you're going to get the 600. You're going to get the 600. We've done a lot of research, just like the teacher from New York, and it's not going to come this week. It might not come next week because there's no way to fund it. They still haven't gotten the funding released from the federal government, and they don't know if it's going to actually take place or even come in. Yeah, it'll be backdated, but in the meantime, we're late. We have the power shut off or we have the cable shut off, and it's
that you do it in a respectful way and you try and, you know, because, you know, it would be great if every, you know, like it depends on your situation too. Like how, you know, how much risk can you take if you've got two small kids or something, or a small kid, or if you are, you know, ill in some way, or, you know, it might be harder for you to take this risk. It might be riskier, but you know, right now there's not a lot of latitude for landlords to be doing stuff, and it's not like they're going to evict you, and they're going to evict you, and they're going to get, like, they've got half a dozen other people who are looking to move in. I mean, at the same rent, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of people who are going to be out of work. This is not going to be exactly a landlord's market, as it were. And you know, I think the idea is to discuss this in a sort of a you know, a nice manner, and make sure that you don't escalate before it's time to escalate.
100%. Yeah. I think just bigger picture though, people are actually seeing that people that are on assistance, it's not exactly their fault that they're on assistance. Not everybody's a meth head or a heroin addict, and not everybody is there because of life choices that they made. So
you know,
hopefully that's getting through to, you know, some people saying, yeah, our system is, we need to pay more to the guys at the bottom. Hopefully this is getting through to some folks.
I mean, there, you know, this is going to be a very, very difficult time for people. So, you know, I'm hesitant to talk about sort of like the potential silver linings that could come out of this. But it is going to make, to the extent that we have a problem with empathy in this country, it is going to make a lot of people understand the reasons why people call for Medicare for all. It's going to make a lot of people understand why people call for more generous unemployment benefits. And it remains to be seen if these numbers are going to be, if these numbers are going to translate into sort of like a change in attitude. And we'll see. I hope so. Greg, hang in there, and good luck.
Last prediction though, I know a bunch of conservatives that if they get paid more on unemployment,
because it's not going to happen if you don't demand it. You know what I mean?
Of course. And I think, you know, in times like this, we get a little bit probably more, you know, keyed in on electoral politics, because that's just sort of the thrust of everybody. But there's a lot of people are out there who are doing organizing work, you know, 24/7, 365. I don't know, 24/7, but 365. And ultimately, the real change is going to come through that organization. And I would say also there is a relationship between electoral politics and ability to organize. Now, I think maybe, you know, some people would disagree with me on this, but the fact is that a Democratic Party, as anemic as it is in a myriad of different ways, you have a better chance of empowering workers. So, you could say, oh, 2 appointments to the National Labor Relations Board, that doesn't mean anything. Well, no, it does. Because if it's easier for people to join a union, that's going to increase the union power, and union power begets more union power. And that's how you organize, not just union power, but that's just an example. That's a small bore stuff. And I'm not saying you should put all your eggs in the basket of electing a Democrat so that they'll get you those 2, seats on the National Labor Relations Board. But that is a net positive. It's not a net negative. There's no reason to not do things that are net positives. And so things can be necessary, but insufficient. And, otherwise it's just sort of like, I don't know, it's just posturing. I mean, look at the Supreme Court is a perfect example of this. One thing that Roberts understands is if we can limit the vote, we can control the whole, it's a rinse, wash, and repeat cycle here. And that's what they're doing. And to break that cycle, you need to break that cycle.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, and I mean, like, and again, I am doubtful about the gains of like electoral politics. But again, like, especially for someone like me, it takes like 30 seconds, and like, there's obviously a net positive to it. And I mean, I know a lot of people think that the Democrats, they're like, oh, they're not going to do anything, all that kind of stuff. But like, we have to demand that change and push them. And they're also like, it's a lot easier for people to organize when they have basic social welfare programs, like when they're not in fear of losing their job.
Exactly.
And when they're not working like 80 hours a week. And it's like, it's relaxing that a little bit and keeping that sort of leftist message in a very, purposeful way. Is a better path forward than just saying, just screw it, and like, none of this is going to work. We're just going to, balkanize the United States, which is, it's a nightmare scenario.
Appreciate the call.
Thank you very much, Sam.
Calling from a 443 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey there, Sam. This is Trey. I live in Pittsburgh now, but I spent most of my life in Maryland.
What's up, Trey? What's on your mind?
A lot, but I got 2 things that I'll put on you. The first is quick. I want to give a shout out to one of my best friends, Zach. He's among many in the Navy Reserves who are currently being dispatched to New York City to help fight that invisible scourge. So shout out to him and everybody else who's headed out there to try and relieve New York. And then the main thing is, there's been a lot of talk, especially, you guys have been covering how a lot of people have fallen in love with Andrew Cuomo because of his handling and his, visibility during all of this.
Yep.
I'm almost more concerned, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts about this, about Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, because he hasn't had, in my experience anyway, the same visibility nationally, but I've been following stuff in Maryland still, and I see that, he's a Republican governor. I am no fan of his. As soon as he got into office, he canceled a work grant program that was the only way I was able to afford to be the first person in my family to go to college. I then had to take out tons of loans. So by no means am I a fan. But in my view, he has been handling it well, the COVID-19 crisis, that is. However, it's been mentioned on your show that some people are able to pick apart someone handling an emergency well from their actual policy goals and achievements. And this is why I see it as analogous to Andrew Cuomo. So I'm concerned that maybe going into 2024, he might be making a presidential run. And if the most recent part of his legacy is handling of COVID-19 in Maryland, and as the current chair of the National Governors Association, that it might help fuel a campaign that could even win some consistently blue states like Maryland and whatever the post-pandemic politics is going to be. So I'm curious to hear your guys' take on that.
Yeah, I appreciate the call. Hogan scares me a little bit in that regard, but I think, the dilemma that Hogan has, and maybe he switches parties at one point, I don't know, but the dilemma he has is that he's a Republican. And so he can't get through the Republican primary as, in terms of the way the party is constituted at this point. So, but yeah, Democrats seem to like him a lot more than one would expect. But, and also, I would also say, and I appreciate the call, I would also say that he's not getting the national bounce out of this that a guy like Cuomo is, just simply because the media is not there. Let's go. Time for one more call. Calling from a 910 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hey, Sam. This is Brandon from Wisconsin.
Brandon from Wisconsin. What's the situation? Did you vote today?
I mean, I already had a absentee ballot. My wife and I kind of did that a few weeks ago, so we're good with that. But yeah, it's pretty crazy here. I mean, I would probably add to the comment that it seems with the situation here in Wisconsin, there's not a lot of support from like the main Democratic Party to actually do things here, because there's a lot of support for, of course, the Republicans and whatnot. Because going back to last year around this time, you might remember the other was the Supreme Court election. You remember that?
Yes, that was completely overlooked by the national media and everybody in Wisconsin.
Yeah, because for that election, I didn't even know there was a vote until the day before, and I ended up missing it because I had to work. And around that time, the main Democratic Party was kind of more so focusing on criticizing Ilhan Omar for her comments about AIPAC.
Yep.
And so it seems like there isn't a lot of support, even like outside of the state, to help in these things and to help with aiding, because as you said before, that you'll have elections where Democrats will get 60% of the vote and only have like 40% of the seats. And there's a good chance that they'll even pick up more Supreme Court seats or another one. So it's just a really bad situation to be in. So that's kind of the issue, because it seems like, kind of piggyback into that guy who was just called before. It seems like with the Democrats, it's like death by 1,000 cuts versus the Republicans, like death by machete. And
yeah,
it's like I definitely understand people's frustration with the Democratic Party, but because my wife, she's a postal worker, and she's basically one of those people that's still relying on Megan Brennan to not retire yet, or else Trump might end up privatizing the whole post office. So I have to basically make sure I'm voting for that.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not an easy situation here in Wisconsin, because a lot of the more conservative voters seem to just only care about, Trump and abortion, and it's like, I'm pro-life myself, but I'm not willing to go against people's civil liberties like that.
Well, Brandon, I appreciate the phone call.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks. All right, folks. That's it for calls. We've run out of time for calls. We're going to take a couple more IMs, and then we're going to get out of here. Couple more IMs. Where is it? Okay. DM Max MJ. If Dem leadership was worth anything, they'd know on Wisconsin like they should have been on impeachment, publicly suggesting they're looking into attempted homicide charge. They'd know on, I'm not sure. But yes, I get your point, I think. Jaboni. Trump stakes in hydrochloroxycin. I can't even say it. Logan W. Hey, Sam, really love the show and finally glad to be able to support you all. I always try and call in with no success. I'm trying the IMs. If you get this, I was wondering what you think about the role podcast and other independent media in getting us through this crisis and connecting leftists and activists. Left is best and F12. Not sure I followed that one. I think it's helpful. I think radio would be more helpful in many respects. If this was a live radio show in 50 states across the country, I think it would be that much more helpful. But I think shows like this are, are filling at least some, providing some value. And I hope we can provide more, but it's better than nothing. It's better than nothing. Pajama Boy. Sam, can we get a Jamie Thursday during these strange times? Strange times calls for a strange show. Well, Jamie's going to be on Thursday with Michael. And I think we now have a technology where we can bring her on audio without, our bandwidth is a real problem. Teddy Sticky Spackle. To Teacher Lauren, even if your husband doesn't have employees, he still has to pay himself. So he should apply for the loan. Yes, Sasha Hab. AOC is doing online info session on applying for the Payroll Protection Act for small business and nonprofits in New York. Here's the link. Tonight at 7. Want to join me for this event? There it is. I'll check it out. Zero Sum Gay. Whether your shoplifting actually impacts a corporation bottom line is immaterial. They will still use it as an excuse to raise prices, pay their employees less. Rogan Meathead Caucus. The conservative courts flexing in Wisconsin's a reminder there will be no progressive anything in this country if we continue to allow Republicans to stack the judiciary. The argument to not vote Dem at this point is a lazy cop-out. You're not going to get socialism when we become a one-party state. 4 more of these. Max in the BK. Hey, Sam, I think an overlooked issue, and I think you mentioned this, is that Bernie's theory that more voting equals a win for him was incorrect. A lot of Super Tuesday states demonstrated that. I think the New York Democratic primary for governor should have been much more of a warning to us that huge voting surges in the primary aren't necessarily going to break for the most progressive candidate. I think you're right about that. The other Biden. Wisconsin primary bad idea genes. Ryan from Wisconsin. I work for the city. I vote, and HR sent an email asking us if we want to work the polls at our normal hourly rate and qualified for overtime. Has never happened in the 8 years I've been working here. Polling site took plenty precautions with social distancing, plexiglass, and a limit of 3 people inside at a time. And the final IM of the day. I don't have the horn yet. Hi, Wisconsin absentee voter here. Biden made a remark that most people don't prefer to vote by mail. Most people do not prefer mail. What does the science say, Joe? Apparently, vote by mail does disenfranchise African Americans at a higher rate, but I think people like to vote by mail to the extent that they can. See you tomorrow.
To get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know.